Welcome to Dying to Know, where we open up about everything that comes with losing a loved one.
Because the only thing that's worse than death is not being able to talk about it.
We're your Bereavement Babes, Leah and Rachel, and today is our first interview. Rachel, this is the last episode of season 2.
I know, we made it through a whole nother season.
Yes, high five to us. And this is our first interview.
Yeah, it's our first interview. We're going to be interviewing Shannon Schreibeck.
Yes.
Who's also goes by Snax on her socials. And we found her through social media, which is super exciting. When I was building or trying to make our Instagram something and like connect with the grief community, she was one of the first Instagrams that really connected with us and like answered our DM, which was super sweet of her, but also had amazing content, which I feel like really stuck out to me. I feel like I've used her stuff for the podcast and just like, I feel like she gives us great messages to use and tweet out. So I feel like I was super excited when she said yes to the interview.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk to her today. Like you said, you found her and brought her to me. And it sounded like she would be a really good fit for our first interview. I'm really interested in learning about her work with like queer grief specifically. I have some questions for that, and I can't wait to hear what she says.
I know. Let's get into it.
Let's do it.
So, hi, Shannon. Welcome to Dying to Know, and thank you so much for being our first interviewee.
Yay.
And we just wanted you, if you could give a little brief interview of where you're from, your pronouns, and what you do for the grief community.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. My name is Shannon Schreibeck. My pronouns are they, she. I'm based in Chicago, and I'm a psychotherapist and also a writer. And I create a lot of grief and holistic health content under the Instagram handle Snax.
Yes, no, Snax was one of the first places when we were starting our socials that I gravitated towards. I feel like a lot of your content is super digestible, and also your branding is beautiful, which was amazing. And also you were one of the first people to like respond to my DMs when I was reaching out, like trying to connect with the community, because it was super new for me, which is why I was very excited that you said yes to being our first interviewee, which made it, very fun, very happy. Reading through your Instagram, I also saw that you were you're a grief doula, is it? Or a death doula?
Death doula, yeah.
An end-of-life doula.
Yes, which I was hoping that you could explain or go into it just a little bit more. I feel like I've just kind of learned about it this year, and it sounded, as we learned about it, we both agreed that it would have been something nice to have while we were going through our experiences. So I was hoping that we could start with that, if that's okay.
Absolutely. And thanks for the kind words. I'm so glad to be here and just love what y'all are doing. As far as being an end-of-life doula, I'm not practicing currently, but I did get my education at the University of Vermont's online program. And what an end-of-life doula is basically part of the support system when somebody's going through the dying process. They'll meet with the person who is approaching end of life and help walk them through maybe end-of-life directives, or help them accomplish things or have conversations that they would want to have before they reach their last day. And they're also pretty crucial in being there for the family too, providing education on what you would expect when somebody's going through the dying process, and also being able to connect those family members to resources is a really important part of the job too. And that's sort of where I started my grief education and grief professional journey.
Oh, wow. That's crazy that's like how it all got started. Mm-hmm. I feel like from that, what I guess took you to like your next step, and when it came to like you being a part of like the grief community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I finished the end-of-life doula program while I was in grad school for forensic psychology. And I had originally gone into forensic psychology because I thought I wanted to work within the criminal justice system, and do some sort of reform work within that system. And after completing that program at University of Vermont, maybe it was that we would talk about the impact of context or even a personal context. And I realized that there was this huge void in grief workers in this forensic environment and in the psychology community as a whole. And that's when I started to create some of the content that I wish I had seen when I
Mm-hmm.
was in grad school or when I was navigating grief. First, when my mom died almost 20 years ago.
Yeah.
So that was kind of the progression of that work.
Yeah, no, I feel like just from speaking to people, I feel like that is a common thread where it's like there feels like a lack of people talking about grief. And that's where people, I feel like, find themselves pushing them in that space.
Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, I realized like also in your work with dealing with grief, obviously we did our research on you and asked you some pre-interview questions as well. But I realized you emphasize queer in a lot of your work, and then specifically you had wrote something about queer grief. Can you explain how people in the LGBTQIA community experience grief differently from others?
Absolutely. This is a topic that's really close to my heart
Mm-hmm.
because I came out as non-binary and bisexual pretty late in life compared to other folks. It was probably in my mid-20s by the time I like fully realized, understood, and felt unafraid to celebrate those identities. And as time went on, I started reflecting on all of this loss that I still felt even
Mm.
after coming out. I felt like I had lost like my college years of being out. I felt like I lost what I thought my future would look like as far as relationships and future building went. And so I started diving into, okay, what is queer grief exactly? And found that it applies to so many LGBTQI plus experiences. Like, for example, um, a person transitioning into a more affirming gender identity or expression, they might lose certain privileges that they might have gotten with their assigned at birth identity. Or a person who comes out when they're married and in a marriage that doesn't feel affirming to their sexual identity, they might lose that relationship or they might lose what that relationship was before coming out. So there is so much grief in that queer experience. That's not to take away from the joy
Mm-hmm.
and the authenticity that we can feel once we come into ourselves. And to expand that definition of queering grief a bit further,
Mm-hmm.
I like using the word queer as a way to express challenging the norm.
Mm-hmm.
So to queer grief can just mean we're going to challenge how we traditionally think about grief or how we typically approach grief and totally queer that process and make grief more of a connective or community building kind of experience as opposed to this isolating, really despairing experience that we often frame it as in Western culture.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. That's so interesting to hear. I mean, myself and Rachel were both allies, and I've
Mm-hmm.
been to different pride celebrations and parties, and
Mm-hmm.
you're right, it's a very joyous occasion. But to realize, you know, I would have never even thought about those different scenarios in
Yeah.
someone's life being like a part of grief. So thank you for dissecting that a little deeper. And as an ally, how do you see us like being helpful to someone during that time in their life to be supportive or to recognize things and like talk about that with someone?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And, you know, when I think about supporting any marginalized group, I like to remind myself that, like, no person's a monolith.
Yeah.
Not everyone's experience is going to be the same, even
Yeah.
if they all belong to the same marginalized group. So I think one of the most fruitful and thoughtful things you can offer someone going through grief of any kind is curiosity.
Mm.
Just asking, "Hey, what is your experience like?" Or recognizing, "Hey, I realize you've lost this, but what am I missing about what you're going through? Can you tell me more about that?" And I think it's so powerful to just give someone permission to share their fullest experience in that way.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
No, I love that because I
Yeah.
feel like under the grief umbrella, people become so shy to it and it feels like you're not supposed to talk about it at all. So I love that the idea is still to like constantly be curious and like let people say their stories and not hide away from your stories with grief, even though it might bring up a little too many emotions. I love that the encouragement is to give people the opportunity to talk about what they're going through.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's what y'all are doing with the podcast too, right?
Yeah.
That's what we're trying to do. No, and
That's
I
true.
think just learning how many different, I guess, varieties or like how different grief comes in so many different
Yeah.
forms, I think has been the most eye opening. Because me and Leah's were both daughters who lost their father. So in the beginning, it was like very similar things. But I
Yeah.
think researching and like connecting with more people in the community, I didn't even realize like how many things like really do fall under that grief umbrella.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so overwhelming, but really validating too
It
to
is
learn all that
overwhelming. That's
vocabulary.
why I really do appreciate your post, because I feel like you post for the seasons, you post, yeah, for queer grief, what people might be feeling, what could be like approaching and like getting, like, I loved your holiday guide. I feel like
Oh, thank
I
you.
talk about that with my therapist for the holidays because I feel like that's the hardest. So when you had a guide for it, I was like, everyone needs to see this guide. Prepare yourselves. Like, I feel like you have created such digestible information when it comes to grief.
And while we're on the same vein of like different personalities and stuff, like as you were saying that we're not a monolith, people who are experiencing that type of grief in the queer community to ask the questions. And we know that as people in general, we have many intersectionalities. We're women, you know what I mean? I'm a black woman, maybe I have a religion, and everything kind of combines, into one person. So when you think of that, like, what type of advice would you give someone that's seeking some sort of like relief in their grief, that wants to find that like niche or communal way, like which way to kind of go in that direction to find like a therapist or like a support group? How do you think someone should find that?
That's a really great question. I think as far as, I guess the first step would be knowing what kind of support do you want? Do you want a support group because you're really aching for that community factor? Are you needing a therapist that you can talk to once a week about identity or grief or whatever topics feel most salient? And I think once you identify what kind of support you're needing, I think reflecting on what identities feel like they need the most support. Like, is it particularly important that I see a therapist who's non binary? Because I want to feel understood between that intersection of non binary experience and grief, and so on and so forth. And I think as far as making that actionable, I think there's great resources out there like Psychology Today. If you're looking for a therapist, Therapy Den, there are really great Instagram accounts out there who have support groups. And I think also just reaching out to your friends, your family, seeing if they've found anybody who they really click with, or even media that feels really supportive, like books or movies or TV, and approaching it in a really holistic way.
Yeah, I know in our journeys, like personally, I was saying to Rachel, like how important it was for me to find, like, I need a black woman therapist. And I'm like, well, why was that important? And how do you like convey that to people who are listening to say, like, this seems to really show up in your life. Maybe this is the direction or like, the person that you should speak with. So thank you for sharing, like, how to kind of like dissect that and figure out what part of your spirit is really speaking to you heavy to navigate that world.
Of course. Yeah. And I think that speaks to like the power dynamic in therapy too. Of like, I talk about this often with my Black clients of even if we have similar experiences, or even if I'm aware of how my privilege shows up, there's still a power dynamic between a therapist and a client. And if they're not comfortable with my whiteness in that space, then, by all means, I want them to see somebody that they can feel safe with. Sometimes it's just not possible with a white therapist. And especially when it comes to grief, which is such a vulnerable, raw experience.
Yeah, no, because I feel like just trying or even getting like to encourage people that it can be a little more of a process. Like you might have to, I like to say, like date around to find the
Yeah.
right therapist for you. Because I know just for me, like I felt discouraged the first time that I tried therapy because I was very like nervous to talk and open up to someone. And it didn't feel like the right fit where it did take me some time. So I feel like it's the best littlest advice I can give, like from being a newbie in therapy, is like it's okay to not like your therapist at first and like see what does fit right for you.
I mean, I am a therapist and I had to really shop around for my own therapy too. recently. It's a very humbling experience. And I'd encourage anyone to not get discouraged because it truly is a process.
Yeah.
Yeah, which I feel like they don't, I feel like say very often because it's just like go and you'll be fine. But it's just like, no, you want your fit. You want to feel super comfortable to be able to spill out everything to them.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I mean, if that person's going to hold your deepest, darkest like secrets and desires and, pain, like I'd hope that you'd at least kind of enjoy sharing space with them.
Exactly. We don't talk about the process of finding a therapist enough. No. Yeah. But since the show is all centered around like grief, and I don't want to say death, but like it's called Dying to Know, and we like to give some people some facts. You had wrote something in your pre-interview. I'm just going to read it verbatim because I just thought it was beautiful, and I just had 2 questions to follow up from it. You had wrote, the more you resist your grief, the more you will suffer in the face of it. Talking about death won't kill you. Avoiding the topic of mortality shortchanges you and your loved ones, which I thought was just so great. So I wanted to know, why do you think people avoid the topic of our own mortality? I mean, I guess it's pretty simple. It's not a happy life, but just from your work that you're doing and the people that you speak with, why do you think one of the main reasons that we avoid it? And just the follow-up to that is, what could it look like if we all faced it and spoke about it openly?
Yeah, those are great questions. I think as far as us not talking about death or grief, I think it often puts us in such a state of discomfort. And discomfort is something traditionally we try to avoid at all costs. I think that we don't talk about the value of discomfort often enough because from that discomfort, we find growth. And I also think that when we talk about grief, we're talking about a lot of like a symbol of our pain. Like if we're talking about grief, we're probably channeling that same like deeply hurt part that lost somebody important to them. And it's really hard to parse out our own experience of mortality as we approach it versus our experience of mortality as a witness to it, of seeing a loved one die. So I think it is such a complex topic, and we're not often given the language to talk about it in a way that feels impactful. So I think that's part of why we shy away from it, along with not wanting to cause discomfort in other people.
Yeah.
And
That's true.
I think if we did talk about it, I mean, my dream is to see grief and death and dying as more of a community-based effort, and that we can help each other in a more impactful way as a community. If, maybe our neighbor experiences a loss in their life, how can we rally around this person? How can we mobilize our network and our own resources and privileges to help uplift this person? And I think it's something that is directly at odds with the society that we live in, which is very capitalist, very individualist, and revolving around rugged individualism overall. And I think it would take a huge cultural shift for us to reach that point. But it's something that I do see as happening through podcasts like yours or Instagram TikTok content that I see around grief, of that it is becoming more of a connective force between people as opposed to this sort of dividing line that keeps us silent and suffering in that silence.
Yeah, it's so great.
No,
I mean,
love that.
the fact that we're doing the podcast to try to build the community, that we're sharing in the same dream that, people talk, we want people to talk about it and feel more comfortable about it. I even think like, since we started this, people will text me and be like, how do you think I should say this? This guy that I talked to is like, grandma died. It's only been 2 weeks. How do I say something? I'm like, I don't know what to say. But the fact that the conversations are happening, I think is important because we talk about everything else. And I think even you saying like we don't even have the language to have these conversations is so important too, because it's been so avoidant to talk about. You know what I mean? It's a sad topic. It's not something joyous. So it's not a dinner, conversation. But even doing this with you, people have approached us like, the death. Like, I'm so glad y'all are talking about it. And they like dump on us. And I'm like, this is really needed. Like, people need a space and a community and a partner for that. So yeah, definitely agree with that.
I love that community is a key word, because even just being on socials, and realizing like once you start connecting how everyone kind of already follows each other. Everyone's very supportive of each other, and it's already built such a great community, which I like. I love that. Yeah, community is a great idea of like how it really can start to expand.
Yeah, we got to do it together, and we're all gonna die.
Yeah,
so it's just
we're all
like we have to talk about it, right? Yeah.
That's amazing. Y'all are seeing like those dividends from building this community too. And yeah, I think that people are often afraid of saying the wrong thing.
Yeah.
And so it sounds like you've sort of become grief consultants to your friends and your family members, because y'all are very well spoken about it. And I think people just need that confirmation that, they're not gonna say something that triggers the grieving person.
Yeah, and just like not feeling alone, I feel like has been an amazing thing too. Like just having someone you can maybe go to.
That is true.
Absolutely.
Well, we're ending our interview with you, Shannon, but we do have one last question. It's a little bit of a silly one, but let's see how you like it, since we're talking about grief and death and the afterlife. Once you reach the afterlife, who would be your celebrity buddy on that side? Like, who would you want to be cool with that's already gone?
Oh, wow. That's such a good question. Man, I never thought about that, to be honest.
I know.
Celebrity buddy.
It's okay if you don't have it. I know it's like mad random.
No, I mean, part of me says Joan Didion because, like, she's my grief MVP, the author of The Year of Magical Thinking and Blue Nights.
Oh, okay. Okay. I was going to ask you who Joan Didion was.
Yeah. That feels like a super cliched grief answer, but it feels very true. So I'm going to go with Joan Didion.
I love that.
Good to know.
And then we also just want to ask you to share all of like your social platforms or anything you want other people to connect with.
Yeah. Where can people find you?
Yes. Where can people find you?
Sure. Yeah, so I'm on Instagram and TikTok under the same username, HeartSnax, HeartSnax. I do like personal essays, audio essays on TikTok, particularly share resources about grief and holistic health. And yeah, pretty much anything you need to know, you'll probably find there.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much, Shannon, for joining us today and for the work that you're doing. It's really important work, and people need you. So thank you for that.
Appreciate you both. It's been so nice talking, and yeah, I can't wait to continue listening to this podcast and see where it goes.
Thank you so much. All right, we did it, our first interview.
Yes, I think that went well.
I think so too. What do you feel like you got out of this interview?
Yeah, I was really happy to learn about specifically for queer grief because like this season we did the stages of grief. We also did ambiguous grief. So to know that people in the queer community have like coming out stories and even though they're celebrated, that we should be asking questions. And
I know, I love that response so much.
And I wasn't expecting it because I know a lot of times people go say like, don't ask me questions, like do your own research. But to hear that questions are okay, that we're not going to get it right and that we can be better supporters in that, I think is great. And then the second part of what I really liked about that interview and what I learned is that we all have a commonality in this community of grief. Like even starting the podcast, I did not think like we were doing work. You know how people frame that to us a lot? Like, what do you do in your work? And I'm like, this is work. This doesn't feel like it. But to know that we're building a community for people to have a place to go, to recognize and work through their grief, I think it's just beautiful to know that.
No, 100%. I think I'm going to piggyback off your answers where I feel like when she said the word community, I feel like it was such like a aha, like light bulb moment. Because I think we love to like remind everyone we're not professionals and we're not really sure what we're talking about, but I feel like she really reassured us that it's okay to maybe not know or be a professional, but just talking about it alone is building the community. It is us working towards building this like grief community and making grief more comfortable for people to talk about. Yeah. Which is a message that we get from all of our fans.
I know.
Our supporters, that they're happy that we're bringing it to the conversation. So it was nice to hear that from a professional that we're helping this community.
Exactly.
Yeah,
and to know like how she was saying like we didn't have the language to even talk about grief and what life could look like if people open up more about grief. So I was like, I think that's a really beautiful
because I feel like we struggle, or I know I struggle with finding the language and everything during these episodes. So it's nice to know that we're all kind of doing this all together. And we're all trying to figure it out all together.
Yes.
But I love that we had this interview and really got to build up this community a lot more.
Absolutely. And give exposure, you know, for people who need, like we always talk about like links and different like people you could follow or reach out to, but now we have like an actual real deal person.
I know. No, I love that.
Yes.
I love that we're bringing this all together.
Exactly.
Slowly but surely.
Yes. So I asked Shannon this question to end the interview, so you know I'm going to ask you. Even though I feel like I know who your answer is, but in the afterlife, who's going to be your celebrity buddy?
I know. I feel like the only name that is popping into my head right now is Selena.
Of course.
But I think I just more want to like watch a Selena concert live than like walk around with her. I think I would be too nervous though to like be her friend.
Be her friend.
So yeah, I'm trying to think of like who would make a great celebrity friend. But I think Selena would be my first go-to. I think I would try and be her friend.
I know. I knew you would.
Can you sing for me? Can I try on your outfits? Can we just like...
just be girl pals?
Yes.
Yeah, that would be you.
Yeah,
okay.
So in the afterlife, I'm trying on her outfits with her. Yeah. What about you? Who would you be your celebrity ghost buddy?
I think the first one came to mind because I want to see them perform as Michael Jackson. Like, do the moonwalk in the afterlife. Like, what a lesson that would be. But I don't know. I guess like anybody else, I never thought past him. I just want to see him live.
Or is there a character too? Like I'm trying to now think like a character, like a fictional character from a movie that passed away that you think
died in a movie? No, I don't think nothing's coming to mind. Yeah. But I think I'm just going to stick with MJ for now. So I just want to see him perform.
Yeah, have amazing music in the afterlife.
Exactly. Yeah, we'll just be dancing in the afterlife.
Right.
Yes.
I love that.
Well, now that we're wrapping with season 2, I feel like I learned a lot this season personally. I think in the beginning when we started off with stages of grief, even during my homework, it felt like it was hard for me to make the connection sometimes.
Yeah.
And even watching it back and listening back, it's really reflective to kind of sit in the seats that we have today to kind of reminisce on what took place originally in our grief. And the phrase came to mind, even though I don't think this is the way it's said, but cry now, laugh later type of thing. Knowing that like when I was in the thick of it, and I'm sure you were in the thick of it, you talk about like how you were crying all night and how Melina had to listen to it.
I know.
But just to think about those days and months and weeks that like it felt so heavy and like I couldn't see a way out, and then to where we are today that we can also like slide some jokes in there and laugh about it or smile or go like, I forgot about that or remember it. So I like that I had the moment to reflect. And I think also in my second episode where I cry, realizing where I was in my grief for that specific loved one. So I think obviously we started the podcast because of our dads. And even though I might not be able to pull from a specific topic from his passing, that there are other loved ones in my life that I can connect to, and realizing where I was in my grief to go, hey, I might be in acceptance here, but I need to kind of explore this and talk about it more. So I thought that was really like the internal journey I took this year.
No, I love that.
On this season. What about you?
I think for me, I really learned that grief comes in so many different like shapes and forms, and even especially in this interview, learning about like queer grief and like what they go through. I just feel like, I mean, I struggled definitely with ambiguous loss. I'm like, I don't get it if there's nothing like there, but that's what it is. There's nothing there, and like there's just so many things that like come with loss that I didn't even think I realized. And I feel like I learned like maybe that's why this problem hurt a little bit more, or like just learning what other people might be going through, and again like how to talk to them or ask questions and like figure out or like I guess better learn what people are going through. Right. Because it took me a while to get there for ambiguous grief, but I think in the end I have like a better understanding that everyone is losing something and constantly going through something, and it's all under grief. Like you wouldn't get like, I like how we try to say this podcast isn't about death, because I feel like that's not just what grief is. Grief is all about like loss too. Yeah. Whether it's a person or a thing or a relationship, grief comes with so much more.
Yeah. It's a huge umbrella.
Yes.
Yeah. And I'm glad that we got the time this season to kind of hit all the little topics.
So definitely a lot of learning this season. Yes. A lot of learning.
And more to come.
Yes. And hopefully for next season, we really love doing this interview. And I feel like we really want to bring more people in and more interviews. So definitely message us, DM us, hit us up, because whether it's an interview with one person or a big group of us grieving all together, we're interested in learning and hearing more people's stories for sure.
Yes, please contact us, message us. Yeah, we would love to hear panels we talked about possibly
Yes.
doing, and just speaking to more people who know more than us, who know less than us, who know about the same,
Yeah.
who have different experiences, just to share that with everyone listening and watching.
And just to keep learning.
Exactly.
Keep it going. Build our community.
Yes. Since this episode was centered around our interview with Shannon, we asked her for her dedication. And today's episode is dedicated to Shannon's mom, Curl Schreibeck. Again, we're your bereavement babes, Leah and Rachel. Thank you for grieving with us all season, and we'll see you on the other side.